This is a recorded lecture for Chapter 3 of HSC 400 Healthcare Analytics. In this chapter, we're going to look at how to develop an analytic strategy, what components there are in that strategy, what the processes are to put that together, and then how you move forward. So we really want to take a sort of a process step look at how that all works, and we're going to do that throughout this lecture. So introduction: an analytic strategy is more than data and data utilization. It's more than data analysis, and it's more than a technology strategy or a QI strategy. It's a lot larger than that. It's coordinating information from a multi levels and multi sources into a comprehensive sort of comprehensive data delivery that is consistent, predictive, and will be standardized so that all anybody who listens to one version of it will understand the next iteration, the next iteration, the next iteration as it develops. An analytic strategy is necessary to ensure that the HCO's analytic capabilities are aligned with its quality and performance needs. I can't tell you how many times I've come to a new facility and found them doing all these wonderful quality improvement projects, which literally fly in the face of their basic strategic plan. So either they have an incorrect strategic plan that they're ignoring, or they are not paying attention to that when they develop these strategies. And like I said, it must be aligned with the strategic plan. It's important that these are all aligned. That includes everything within an organization, more than just analytics. It includes when you do somebody's evaluation, their goals for the next period, the next reporting period, should be consistent with the goals of the organization. So trying to align all that is pretty important, and with analytics is even more important. Now, the purpose of an analytic strategy is pretty clear in that it helps guide the HCO's ability to rapidly respond to new situations, to things that are changing as far as the resources, the political climates, a ton of different things that can happen. Perhaps a new regulation that's come out. You want to decide how to best respond to that and to support that and do the right things. Of course, you have to do it, but how to do that in a fiscally prudent sort of manner. So it prevents us from making emotional-based decisions, which, by the way, never turn out well. And it serves as a basic resource for our strategic planning. Now, there's strategic planning and then there's tactical planning. Strategic planning is what you predict your organization is going to do. You should do it every 3 to 5 years, but every year you should revise that, and then within that there should be some tactical things that are going to happen. Maybe a new opportunity shows up, and maybe you need to alter your strategic plan to include that opportunity because it's one that you didn't perceive when you were putting it together. Now, the purpose of analytic strategy continued. It helps the HCO do the following. It identifies what data is required, what major projects to undertake, and it prioritizes them, which is important. What skills, knowledge are necessary and or will be necessary to meet the future demands, both of the analytics team as well as the other manpower resources you're going to need when it comes to performing or completing whatever you put together. What data integration is necessary, and that includes how we're going to put the data together, how we're going to measure it, and then the software and the hardware is going to be needed to sort of support this the integration process. And then, as all businesses, healthcare organizations are included, if you will, are included, is how to maximize the return on investment. Return on investment is really, if I spend $15 million for an MRI machine, what's my return on investment? So I run the MRI round the clock, and so at a certain point in time I paid for it, and then I get money back. So it tells me how much money I'm spending on it and how much money I get back to see it's worthwhile even doing it. So return on investment on systems, people, tools, techniques, and work processes, that's all pretty important as you look through that. Now, I took this out of the book because it's a great quote. It's the purpose of analytic strategy, and it says, the analytic strategy is a critical adjunct to an HCO's BI strategy because the hardware, data integration, and data management required for BI also enables the use of analytics. If an HCO is just embarking on the development of a BI infrastructure, perhaps including enterprise data warehouse development, then analytics requirements should be considered during the requirements gathering phase. If a BI infrastructure is already in place, an analytic strategy can help to identify any gaps that exist in the BI that might need to be addressed to fully enable the desired analytics requirements of the HCO. What this is really saying is you have to meet the requirement. As an administrator, I must have said this a gazillion times, and that is, you have to meet the requirement. There are lots of ways to meet the requirement, and you need to do it in a quality sort of way. So how do you meet the requirement? How do you maximize your return on investment? How do you minimize your resources that are addressed to that activity? And how do you make all that happen? And you do that through an analytic strategy that says, okay, you can have 10,000 people do one function, or you can have one person do 10,000 functions. There's lots of different ways to look at it, and so you need to be able to look and see without emotion and with a data-driven sort of central theme how to make that happen. Now, the purpose of analytic strategy continues. It connects the HCO's internal resources and stakeholders with the external environment stakeholders. And that sounds a lot like strategic management, because it is. To have a good analytic strategy, you cannot just do that inside of a bubble, inside the HCO. You have to consider all the events that are occurring around you. That includes the political environment, the religious environment, the stakeholders externally that might be involved, the stakeholders internally that might be involved. It might be everything from the governor to the janitor, if you will, a janitor's union. It could be anybody. And you have to be able to take all that in, because they all have some influence on the success of that given strategy. So that enables the HCO to leverage information to respond to changes that are internal and external. It allows the focus on quality and performance in a continuum. So in other words, we're not saying, oh, we'll do quality today and business tomorrow. It's all one interrelated facet. Helps to align HCO activities with strategic goals. And you'll hear me say this about 1,000,000 times, is that everything you do in an organization should align with the strategic goals of that organization. Everything. So if you haven't done your strategic goals to say, okay, this is the focus, the core value of the organization, this is the objectives, the goals, all of that. If you don't have that in place, then nobody knows where you're going. Everybody's kind of going in a circle. So this allows the HCO to respond to critical events. Maybe your strategic plan didn't really have that, and a new critical event came up, maybe good or bad, an emergency, and now you have to put that together. It helps to respond to that data, make it a data-driven process. It also helps direct priorities so the analytics team doesn't become overwhelmed. Everybody has a great project. Some of them require a little bit of effort, and some of them require a lot of effort. Some of them have great value, and some have very little value. So you have to be able to analyze those in such a way to say, okay, this would take 10 gazillion people to do it, and we'd gain $1 worth of effort, $1 of result. Not very helpful. Though it sounds really good, that's the outcome. And then this other project may cost us $10 and give us $1 million in return. Believe me, there are lots of those little projects around where you spend a little money and get a lot of money back. It also helps activity align with the HCO's strategic priorities. Again, I'm saying it one more time, has to align with the strategic plan. Now, you look at the analytic strategic framework, you have to really focus on quality improvement. Now, healthcare organizations have continual needs to coordinate decisions between departments. IT is responsible for all the for instance, IT is responsible for the implementation and maintenance of all the hardware and software, but I'm sure you can understand that the business office and even the nurses, the doctors who use the software have some input in how it is, what should be used and what different kinds are available. And analytics can provide a data-driven methodology to help both parties come to some sort of congruency or agreement about what would be the best answer. Now, it also helps HCOs recognize and agree on quality and performance goals, helps determine the best methods for achieving those goals, helps to identify the analytics required to enable those methods, and it helps to identify the team members that you need to assemble to make the process functional. And sometimes you'd be surprised about who sits on a team. We were doing we literally did an extension to the university, and it was an extension that was 2 times as large as the hospital space we had already. So it was really a rebuilding university. And we brought in the custodial service, and people were like, well, why did you do that? They had some of the best ideas for putting things together and minimizing waste. It was amazing. If you look at the value added of the custodial membership within this building plan, they probably contributed millions of dollars of savings compared to all the engineers. It was kind of spectacular. And so you have to make sure that you don't overlook somebody or minimize somebody. Now you look at the analytic strategy framework here, and this is in your book. You'll see this in figure 3.1. What you'll see is an analytic strategy is really made up of 6 different facets. You have the business and quality context. You have the stakeholders and users. You have to look at the processes and data. You have to identify the tools and techniques you're going to use. Have to identify team and training. I can't tell you how many times we put something in place, but we don't really look at the training that we need to bring our users up to date so you can use the new technology or the new process. And then technology infrastructure, how we're going to buy it, what's the best way to buy it. Sometimes you lease equipment, sometimes you buy equipment, and there's reasons to do both. Again, you're looking at return on investment or money, how much money it costs you. So all of this sort of adds up, and you need to look at all of that. We look at the components. We look at the first the building and quality context, and that's to address the quality, financial, performance goals of the healthcare organization. Must include clear and concise presentation of HCO's goals and why those goals are important. Not that we have goals, but they're important because of and these underpinnings that support that. Must consider the financial pressures as well as meeting regulatory requirements. You have to meet the regulations, but you have to do it in the most fiscally sound way you can. And fiscally doesn't mean physically, it means fiscally like financially supported. The types of problems can be like clinical quality, provide best possible care to the patients, financial, which is meeting all the obligations in the most financially sound way, patient throughput and value, optimizing the patient experience, limiting their waiting times, optimizing their customer satisfaction, and then human resources, supporting morale and well-being of employees, making sure employees are taken care of and happy and that the turnover rate is low, and on and on. Then you have to look at the stakeholders and users. That includes patients. Obviously, patients whose health and care are the focus of the HCO and obviously should be the focus of the analytics. A sponsor, another person that plays. They're a person who supports and provides financial resources in this process. An influencer. This is a person who holds influence over the decision making. They may or may not have a direct influence, but they could have they have a direct play, but they're an influence. Like when we rebuilt our hospital, as I was talking about, the governor had some special things he wanted us to look at. One of them is a child-focused pediatric emergency room. And so we adjusted the plans to do that. Why? Because the governor personally donated about $2 million to make it happen. So those are things that kind of come into play. They influence our outcome, which later influenced our personnel and influenced a lot of other areas. Did it make the organization better? Of course it did. If it wouldn't have made it better, would we have done it? Probably not. We'd have figured out, we'd have worked on some other alternative. And then the customer. The customer is not always the person within the HCO, is not always the customer like the patient. It can be a person with the healthcare organization who accesses analytic tools or uses the output of analytic tools. The customer is everybody. The truth is everybody in an organization is a customer. When you're a custodian, all the people all the places you take care of are your customers. And the truth is that if you're the CEO, all the people that work in the organization should be your customers, as well as the patients, as well as all the stakeholders that play in that. They are all your customers. Now you look at stakeholders and users, the influencers, that can include the physicians. They may want to use real-time analytics for improving their diagnostic accuracy. You could have unit managers who want to determine what patients are likely to exceed length of stay targets. Look at quality improvement teams that identify bottlenecks in the patient flow, evaluate outcomes of quality improvement initiatives, and then the executives which want to evaluate and monitor overall performance of the organization or departments within the organization. All of those are stakeholders in a given process. Now, analytic strategy must include how all stakeholders are affected and should consider specific problems being addressed by the healthcare organization, decisions for which the analytics insight is required, actions that are triggered by analytics indicators. In other words, you can say our bed count is, we looked at beds every day. How many beds have we filled? And if our bed count was low and we had a bunch of people waiting in the emergency room for beds, don't you know it was kind of a hectic kind of situation. That didn't happen very often because when it happened, it was so intense that the people that had beds available never let them, dwindle ever again. They made sure they were filled. The risks that analytics identifies and help to mitigate those risks. It should also consider what key processes need to be monitored and improved, and that means after you make a change, how do you monitor that to ensure that it's sustainable? What indicators are required to monitor quality and performance, like I said, after the fact? Those are all really important aspects. Now, the analytic strategy framework components should include strategies for working well with stakeholders. That includes identifying key members of each of the stakeholders, understand the needs of each stakeholder group and the needs of the members within each of the stakeholder groups. Listen and acknowledge and act on the input from the stakeholders. Don't discount it. It all has value even if it's not delivered in a way you want it delivered. Keep stakeholders informed of the progress. That's the most important part of this, by the way, is not keeping stakeholders. If stakeholders don't get information, they start looking. And when they start looking, your job starts to increase like tenfold. And if you don't respond, it increases 100-fold, and it becomes logarithmic again after that. The idea is if you keep them informed, then they are less likely to, in an ad hoc sort of fashion, seek out information. And you deliver on promises made to stakeholders and demonstrate the value of analytics in addressing the stakeholders' needs. Now, if you can't do that, if something happens, we started a project when I was in charge of project management in the university, and we would start a project, and the project we thought was going to be a 2-week project turned out to be a 2-month project. And so I had to go back to CEO and say, these are the reasons I can't finish this in 2 weeks. I can give you data in 2 weeks, but it won't be the data you want. In 2 months, I can give you great data. In 2 weeks, I can give you preliminary data. Which do you want? Well, he wanted both. So I gave him preliminary data and said, okay, but this is a plus minus, 70% accuracy, just so you know, and I'll have a much better look at that because I'll have collected much stronger data later. And fortunately, the data we collected in 2 months was pretty close to data we had. There were a few changes, a few surprises, and that did a couple things. First of all, it made the CEO believe in analytics a little more and process improvement, project management, but it also let them know that when I asked for more time, I wasn't asking arbitrarily, that there was value added. Now, we look at the analytic strategy framework. You have to look at process and data. And to make data useful, an analytic strategy must address how to determine which data is most important for quality and performance improvement. There's always lots of data, and some of it's clean and some of it's not. How the data is managed and is quality assured, and how the data links back to business practices for necessary content. I'll never forget having a discussion with the analytics folks about dirty data. We had some PhD analysts, and they were very anal retentive about focusing on only clean data, and we didn't have it. I was at that time, and so what I suggested, is the data dirty, but is it consistently dirty from month to month? In other words, are the errors in that consistent? He said yes. I said, okay. If the errors are consistent, then it's not the absolute number that's important, but the difference, what changes in the delta from month to month. If all the dirtiness is standardized and equal, then the difference is still programmable and predictable based on that, because now you can say, okay, if the number is 10, but it's a little dirty, and the number next month is 12, it's better than it was before with the same dirtiness, so to speak. So you have to start to think about those. It's kind of an interesting dilemma. Now, we look at the strategic components of the data and processes. We first have to look at data sources, and data sources are, what are the sources available? What data is necessary to address the business issue? What are the data sources? What's more important? Because obtaining some data sources is easy, and others is far more expensive. So what is necessary? How is the data integrated into the source systems? How and where is data stored and made accessible to analytics, for example? Is there an enterprise data warehouse? We talked about that in the last chapter. We can look at data quality, and I kind of alluded to this before. How good is the quality and availability of the data? That's the question. Is the data quality good enough for analytics? And that's that dirty versus clean data thing. What gaps are there in the data? What exists? And does metadata, that's documentation, exist for the data? Metadata is kind of a collection of all the variations. And then finally, data management and governance. Who's responsible for data management, governance, and stewardship of the data? What policies and procedures exist for data governance and management? That's the next step. And the next one is business processes. What business processes and workflows align with important quality and performance issues of the organization? That's pretty important. What data is available for measuring performance and quality of key processes? If no data exists, is there a proxy? Can we measure sort of something else to give us an indicator? Or do we have to go search for it and drill down? What additional processing and analysis is required on available data? So we have to decide, we have this data, how do we filter it or how do we break it down so we get what we need? So we look at data quality management governance. Before any analytics, the relevant data must be understood by all stakeholders and be available. And the data from source systems must be inventoried, analyzed, documented, and aligned within the business processes. You can't collect data using method A when you're going to measure it by method B. You only do that once because it creates a lot of work at the end. Successful execution of an analytic strategy requires that data be identified, documented, processed, and made available, which supports this statement. The goal of the analytic strategy is to focus efforts on the HCO's most important quality and performance objectives. I can't say this enough. Like, I'm trying to think, in 2003, our quality improvement program, our quality improvement team, department, was made up of 8 people. And we had 4 additional resources which were analysts. So we had 12 people. And we were given in that year over 1,600 projects. Now, we didn't do them all, obviously, but we certainly prioritized them and did the first 300 or so, 320, I think, when it was all done, which were the most bang for the buck, as I like to say a lot, which means we did the ones that gave us the most return. And then when we had time, we started to go down to the lower priorities. Now, we didn't just ignore the others. We did help them sometimes to establish their own little process groups, which could sort of support what they were doing to collect the data, so then we could go back later and maybe help them out. So we didn't leave them hanging, but we also didn't drop everything and make that go on from there. The other thing you'll see is the quality of data impacts what information, insight, and value can be obtained from the tool set. That's a dirty versus clean data question. Data stewardship is critical. Improper management can lead to erroneous results, and HCOs must determine what data management and government structures are best, and those will be different and more specific by organization. There are many, many ways to skin this particular cat. And so, though it must be consistent and it must be as foolproof as possible, it may not be the same animal. Then we have to look at business processes. The major data related to challenge HCOs is adding content to data. That is, taking the things we do, the content, remember that's taking information from text and seeing what we do, and data and all processes are kind of inseparable. You have to put those together. And an HCO, healthcare organization, must know what value there is in a given process. When you do process mapping or job mapping, you find there are a lot of steps sometimes that have no value added. You do them for no value. I'll never forget we had these administrators that covered the hospital at night. They were the administrators at night. And they were usually senior nurses, but not part of the senior management. So they're senior middle managers. And so to sort of control them, they put a bunch of processes in place, checks and balances that these people had to fill out and complete before the shift was over. So they spent an 8-hour shift or whatever it was, about 4 hours just filling out these damn forms without really being the administrator they needed to be. So we gave them this inordinate amount of stuff to return to us, and the truth is nobody looked at half of it. And so we started going back and started reverse engineering what we wanted them to do, and we found out their total paperwork requirement was really only about 2 hours. What happened then? They had more time to deal with the critical issues that weren't terribly critical, but they could deal with right away. So that when the morning came, all the department managers and executive directors and all that, all us administrators, we weren't stuck with 50 things to take care of that couldn't be handled by the administrative people at night. So it really made a difference just by eliminating the crap that they didn't have to do. You also have to look at tools and techniques. After the business problem, quality goals, stakeholder input, and available data items have been identified, you have to identify the needed tools and techniques. You have to have the right tool for the job. You can't dig a new basement with a spoon. And you'd be surprised how often I've said that to people. They will suggest that we use a certain kind of software to give us a very sophisticated result, and that's not possible. And so our data mining, I remember asking for a data miner. It was called Clementine, believe it or not. and it was about $3,000. And the CEO was like, "You don't need this. You have Excel and data, you have access." And I said, "Well, if you'd like to pay somebody to build that software for us, that'd be great. I'll turn it over to IT." So IT came back and said it cost him $4,000 to build it. And so the CEO decided it was okay to spend $3,000 to buy the packaged software, which was better anyway. And also, that we have to have an acquisition strategy for data tools. Where's the money coming from? How are we going to look at our return on investment for that? We have to look at types of analytical tools that we're going to buy. They are statistical, visualization, and data profiling and quality. Statistically, they need to have statistically based software for deeper statistical analysis, SPSS, if you will, by IBM. And there's several others that help us do correlation regression tests, ANOVA, t-tests, non-parametric tests, statistical process control charting. All those are not done with Excel and Access. Visualization, you have to have advanced visualization tools that allow them to interact visually and explore data in a dynamic, up-to-date sort of manner so that people can see what's happening. It has to be intuitive. You can't create counterintuitive tools so people can't use them. So you can create something that requires 50 steps to get a yes or no that makes it almost impossible. And then data profiling and quality, you needed to identify and highlight patterns of good and poor data, and not only identify it, but help to identify how to fix it and correct it and prevent it from happening again, or at least eliminating that particular cause and effect. Now, with everything you do, you have to have teams and training is essential. I've walked into an organization one time as a consultant, and they had put a new software in that was failing miserably. And I asked them, what was their training tail? How did they put that together? And they said, well, we just handed them the manual and asked them to study it. I said, how's that going? And they said, well, not very well. I said, because it's not formal training. And by the way, did you pay them extra time to do that? Oh, no, we had to do it on the regular while they were working. I said, some of these people are working, full 8 hours, and they don't have time to do that. Well, they could take it home. Do you think they'd really take it home and do it on their own? No. So you have to make it formalized, and it costs money. It's not cheap. But if you want to institute a change and you want to train the people to do that, you have to formally train that. And what that does a couple things. One is it guarantees that they've accomplished that. You can measure their success or failure. And two is it lets them know it's important to the organization that they're taking time and money to have them trained. It was interesting because an example of that is I had an emergency room one time which had a terrible reputation, and they were considered to be the rudest people in the whole world, and people didn't like them, and they were treated badly by the rest of the hospital. All this wasn't true, but it was perceived. And so there's a program called CARE program, and it's a CARE program is to teach patient sensitivity, and we took every one of those members of the emergency room, and we sent them to the CARE training, and they got certificates. And we started processes like when somebody and they started this themselves, by the way, because it was CARE training, the Care Bear thing came into place, and somebody bought a bunch of these little Care Bears, and so when they saw any staff or whatever, going above and beyond, they'd hand them a Care Bear. Now these Care Bears were like $3 or $4. They weren't very expensive. But it's interesting because I had senior nurses that have been in the world of medicine for 20 plus years, who were sitting by their workstations and have 3 or 4 Care Bears, and they were like they were like so proud of those Care Bears because it showed they'd gone above and beyond. Little things go a long way. It's really interesting. And so team training is very important, and team training really adds to that. It can include autodidactic, where you have people go through a software program that they learn, or it can be instructor-led. Now, quality improvement and process improvement teams are often multidimensional, and that's important. I told you about the janitors saving us millions of dollars in the building of a whole new, or 2/3 of a new hospital. They really did, and there's no way around it. They really did. They understood what happened underneath everything we thought we knew. So the members have to be from many backgrounds, and you don't minimalize anybody. You'd be surprised who has the information and who will save you millions of dollars. Now remember that all members have different agendas. They want to go back and tell their boss they did this for the boss, so they can look good and then help their team, their home teams, if you will. So you have to be careful of that, but that's part of how it plays. And then members have different skill sets. Some people understand statistics and analyses, some people don't, and so you have to take that into consideration as you put them together. Now, team and training, as we look at that, will follow this set of guidelines, and I'll go through those a bit for you. In the world of analytics, analytics professionals have to be able to communicate in lots of ways. They have to be good listeners and good explainers. And I think they have to be good translators. I tell them they have to be able to translate statistically significant information into doctorese, nurses, and administratorese. And I laugh about that, but it's really important. It has to be effective and clear. It has to be accurate. There has to be a lot of graphs and things that people understand, a lot of visualization, and the requirements are elicited so they can be responded to. So communication is really important. Technical skills are important. Analytics can be highly technical, and so analytics professionals need to be able to be competent in lots of different areas of healthcare. So to be an analytics expert, it's also good to know about how everything else works. Just understanding how to count it and how the data collected isn't enough. You have to look at the human factors that are involved, both with patients and with staff. And so intermediate programming and computerization skills are necessary. Database query skills are necessary. Clinical. Healthcare analytics professionals must know enough about the healthcare aspect, the business aspect, to be able to understand how that goes together with the financial aspect. You have to understand basic healthcare processes and the basic healthcare financing models. That's why you bring those experts into play as an analytics person when you're putting those strategic plans together. They have to understand quality improvement. Quality improvement, is not necessarily intuitive. And that's because there's lots of ways to look at it. There's lean version, there's Six Sigma, there's another improvement processes. There's rapid quality improvement, RQI. There's all sorts of ways to look at it. Let me give you for instance. So if you did a project, and this project resulted in 97% improvement, or 97% success across the board, you'd think that was a pretty good result, wouldn't you? And most of us would. But let me put it in Six Sigma sort of vernacular. In Six Sigma vernacular, let me give you some sort of data that goes along with that. If the airline industry had a 97% success rate for their support systems for airplanes, 18 planes would fall out of the sky every day. Not very good. If that 97% was added to all surgeries done and that only 3% went awry, there would be over 2,000 surgeries every day that would result in malpractice. If the 97% success was applied to the security and safety of elevators, about 3,000 elevators brakes would let loose and people would be dropped to the ground floor and die every day. So you can see that 97% really isn't the answer, is it? And so Six Sigma suggests that we should look for a process that is, we look for 100% success, knowing that we're never going to get there, but trying very hard to look at 100% success and never being happy till we get to 100% success. The other thing is to look at, they'll talk about eliminating variability. There's a really good formula that says every time you add another variable to a process, you double the chances of it going wrong. So if there's 3 variations, and by the way, that's exponential. So if you have one process going wrong, you have 10 times potential, and then so it's 10 to the second becomes 100 times greater potential, and then if 3 problems is now 1,000 times the potential. So it's exponential. And then we have to look at quality improvement. If we look at quality improvement here, you see that's one of the primary uses of healthcare analytics is to quality improvement, and that lean, like I said, the process mapping is going to be important, and the team and group facilitation is important. And then the next step is at the very bottom is going to be analytical. And analytical is really focusing on the data. It's the toughest of all challenges because you'd be surprised how many people want to emotionalize, personalize, and bias and taint data so that they get the results they want, including CEOs on down to whoever participates. It's pretty terrible. And so as analytic people and quality improvement, process improvement people, you have to have the ability to think critically and analytically and be able to relay that to all stakeholders and try to prevent it being biased. The data has to be data-centered, has to be an obsession with evidence-based problem resolution. And evidence-based is really important. It has to show that it has a track record of being successful. And then it has to have familiarity, ability to use scientific principles in addressing quality and performance problems. You have to put them in a scientifically focused sort of way, and that's the goal. Now, that when you look at technology and infrastructure, analytics must remain business focused. Now they have to, it's clearly they have to be patient-centered and staff-centered too, but they have to create a rudder for healthcare leaders, rudder like the thing that guides a boat, and quality improvement teams and decision makers. Has to have a business, has to be fiscally responsible. You have to understand that analytics demands are growing exponentially, and such that the single person sitting in the back room doing these studies is no longer has the expertise or can have the expertise or the time to accomplish all the needs, because of all the expertises that are needed. They're not the only person. They need more than one person. Analytics must be multi-layered so that the information crosses and correlates information at all levels and sources that are applicable. That's a really tough thing to really focus on, because everybody wants to look at the quick fix, the low-hanging fruit, the easy-to-solve problem. And that easy-to-solve problem may have unexpected outcomes that may be worse. You may decide to do one thing which makes it worse, 10 times worse at the other end. So you really have to look at everything, again, in an unbiased, untainted way. And analytics help the organization understand the resources required to meet that need, and that's pretty darn important. Now, the steps involved in this, you have to document the current state. You have to identify where you're at in time, so it's the line in the sand, and review the 6 main components we've gone through in this lecture, and discuss those with stakeholders. Talk about what is and what is not working. What elements are essential the way they are now, and what elements could be changed or need to be changed. Ask stakeholders how they would improve the process. You'd be surprised who comes up with the best answer. You'd think like a department supervisor would have all the answers. Sometimes it's just a little worker in the bottom of the food chain that comes up with the best answer. Identify the gaps, document what improvements could make the process better, and then prioritize them. Because again, you may not be able to fix everything. Contrary to Six Sigma, you may not have the money and the dollars and the resources to fix everything. You want to make major changes, and you go back and make those other improvements as you move along. And then it has to have an executive strategy. This is not set in stone. I'm sorry, execute strategy. I'm sorry. It's not set in stone. And I want to say it again. What you start out doing may be not what you end up doing. I've started a project, and there's a thing called scope creep, where you start out doing a small project, it becomes a gigantic project. Sometimes that happens, and most times it's because you're not controlling the project. But if it happens, because it has to happen, it's necessary, it serves the fiduciary responsibility of the organization, then you must assess, reevaluate, re-implement, if you will, your analytic strategy. You started out by recreating a mouse, and now you're going to recreate an elephant, and they aren't the same animal, and the processes will be different. So instead of trying to create an elephant using the mouse strategy you had before, you want to do something new and different. And that will help you develop that analytic strategy. Now, there is a template I've put into this week's module, and that will show you, gives you an outline from Trevor Stone, the gentleman who wrote your text, a nice outline and a template of how to put together this analytic strategy. Thank you very much. Have a good day.